So, Andrew, a big welcome to you. It's good to see you. And I
Hello, Andy.
guess,
Nice to see you.
and I guess we should really begin, if you'd be kind enough, Andrew, to introduce yourself and explain a little bit your role.
Thank you, Annie. Much appreciated. Hello, everyone. Well, I'm Andrew Collinson. I'll start in the past. I used to be the research director of SDL Partners, and I saw Emma was on the call a little earlier. I don't know if she's still there. But SDL Partners has a long history of looking at new business models in telecoms. And we started looking at platform business models and what used to be called the two-sided telco business model back in about 2008. So I've been
Gosh.
looking at the space for an awfully long time and banging the drum to say, look, there's some really interesting things that telcos can do in the world outside of connecting calls and texts. So that's my history before that. I was in an operator and I also helped up start businesses, and I worked in mobile and fixed and all kind of different places. And I now do a couple of different things. I left STL about a year and a half ago, and I set up my own thing. I'm still great friends with STL. Work with them at one of the places I work now, which is CPASA, which is the CPAS Acceleration Alliance, who are a really interesting group of people who try to, well, do what they say on the tin, accelerate CPAS. And what's that all about? Well, CPAS is one of the areas that will be very important to network APIs for operators. It's not just about network APIs. Network APIs are, in a way, one of the tools in the box. And the relevance of CPAS to APIs and network APIs to CPAS is it's all part of something actually quite a lot bigger than all of us, really. And I guess what I'm trying to do is help people put that in context and understand how it works together. And I think that's what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do as part of my role at CPASA, is help people engage with that and understand it. Because I think what I see a lot of is, a lot of tech talk without really, and there's a bit missing between what the tech talk is saying and what the business is on the other end, the enterprise market, and what's the world actually trying to do with all this stuff. Why is it important? Why does it matter? Who cares? And I think that's terribly important, and I think that's the last gap. I think that's the bit that's missing in the market now. So Annie, you made the mistake of letting me shoot my mouth off about what I do. I do some other stuff as well,
So
but
I
that's the
guess
relevant
one
bit.
of the things about this conference is exactly trying to bridge that gap between
Yeah.
the technology and the business outcomes, because
Yes.
too often we're focused on the tech end rather than what the heck we're supposed to be doing with it or want to do with it.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things when we had our preparation for this session quite a while ago now, um, one of the things we talked about and that really stayed with me regarding APIs and their importance is engagement.
Yes. Yes. And
And I thought maybe we could begin by you enlarging a little bit on why you think that's the kind of killer thing, really.
well, so I think there are two things going on, and engagement is one of them. And then the other question is, what's an API for? Why do people want an API? Maybe if I start with why do people want an API, it'll make it easier to link into the conversation we've just heard. I think fundamentally the reason that people use APIs is that they're convenient, they're easy, they make something easier that you need to do often. And also, I think a thing about APIs are they're typically things you're building into something you already have. So you go to an API to get to something to plug into something you're already doing. So, but go back to what I first said, which was it needs to make things easier. And one of the things that's been a challenge about telecoms, particularly network APIs, let's say
Mm.
perhaps SMS and voice, because they're much more obvious people, they're much more well known by people and often done. With network APIs, they're not obvious and they're not easy. And the benefit of some of the stuff that's going on at the moment, the Kamara and the Open Gateway activity that GSMA are running, is to try and make it easier. But as anyone knows, if you're trying to make something complicated easy, it's not easy. And that road is quite a complex road. So that's why we're having all these complex conversations. But so why do people care about APIs? Because they make things easier to do. They make things easier to do on volume, which is why software is interested in it. And of course, it is a software thing. It's an applications, programs interest. So software goes off and gets stuff. Come back to engagement. what's happening in the world of business at the moment, the world of enterprise. One of your previous speakers was talking about AI. Fundamentally, we are at a really, really extraordinary point in the evolution of business right now with AI. And what AI is allowing, or potentially allowing, businesses to do is to operate on a much more real-time basis, much more not thinking about plans that are weeks, months ahead, but thinking about what we learned today and how we change. They're trying to change their cycle of operation to something that's immediate and instantaneous. And to do that, in a lot of cases, you need to have data exchange with people. And a good word for that is engagement, because a lot of what CPaaS does, and we'll talk a bit more about CPaaS in a minute, because it's a horrible word for actually something that's
It
quite
is.
useful, um, is all doing the same stuff. It's helping people, it's helping companies in particular, but also people engage with people and people engage with software more effectively, more quickly, which is what AI is doing. Fundamentally, AI is a better, well, theoretically better. Is it truthfully better at the moment? It's, discuss and debate, and I'm not really talking about that. But as it evolves, it's becoming a better way to interface with software and a better way to interface with data. Notice the word interface, engagement. Engagement is what businesses are trying to do. They are trying to engage with their customers, their partners, their people, the devices, the process. They're trying to get all that information flowing. They're trying to get that engagement going much more quickly so they can operate better. They can operate better services. They can respond to your needs more quickly. So engagement, and I think it captures things better than perhaps say communication, because communication just means what we're doing now, chatting, or text communications or something like that. And what's going on in APIs is a little bit more than that. It's not just communication, it's going to get a piece of information. So I'm going off and finding out, is it really Annie Turner that I'm talking to on the Mobile Europe webinar today? Is that really the place that I'm in? But that's really valuable information, because if it's not, I'm currently wasting my time and talking to a list of bots, which I sincerely hope I'm not.
I'm not a bot, really. I'm not. Okay, so let's have a look at what you think the biggest drivers are, and where you see the biggest applications right now for the APIs, and how you expect that to change over time. And then I think we can segue into the next question, which is to talk about the market, which I think is possibly a lot more complex than sometimes. I think we struggle with that a bit. But
Let's try
let's
not to
start
make
with
it.
the drivers and how you think it might
Yeah,
evolve.
let's try not to make it more complex. Well, I think if we're talking about network APIs only, you want to focus on that.
Well, not only because I mean they work with other APIs, don't they? I mean, it's
Yes,
trying to section that off seems a little artificial to me.
yes. Okay. Well, look, APIs. I don't know how many there are. There are thousands, hundreds, millions. I don't know how many there are in the world.
I
Is
shudder
maybe
to think how many the average telco has.
it's just lots of them everywhere. There are internal ones,
Yeah,
external ones. So no idea how many there are and all the things that they do. As I say, I mean, they're fundamentally about making things more convenient and work quicker. So where do network APIs fit in that, and where does it work right now? I think you kind of heard it on the previous panel, but I tend to
yeah,
simplify it a bit. I think there are two broad applications. One is essentially fraud and identity, and I kind of mix those two things up. But most fraud um, depends on someone pretending to be someone they're not, which is why fraud and identity are fundamentally linked. So, and that is the biggest, hottest, immediate problem that so many businesses have. So that is the hot space right now. That's the place where if telcos want to make network APIs work, they've really got to make that work right now, because that's where there is massive demand from industry, where people have got billions and trillions of dollars worth of problems to solve. And where they've got that kind of scale of issues, and I'm trying to think of a couple of examples. Um, there's a very good example in digital advertising where um, digital advertising is something like a $600 billion market, and a third of it is fraud. So if you can help someone solve a $200 billion problem, you've got quite an interesting solution. Just keep it really simple. So fraud, that's one example for that. I was talking to at Mobile Congress, I was talking to someone from one of the main financial institutions, and they have billions of transactions every day, and they are trying to verify each of those transactions, and they're looking for sources which will very quickly say, yes, that's the right person. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. At sort of microseconds or not nanoseconds, but very short frequency. They want to know that, and that's really valuable to them, and they're looking to answers for it. So if telcos can bring in a suite of services which actually answer that question and help them solve that problem, blooming fantastic. And that's why the know your customer, the mobile number verification, those SIM swaps, they're fantastically useful for that. They're not the only things out there, by the way. And that's one of the things you've got to bear in mind. It's not all about telcos. There's lots of other ways of testing is this fraud, but it's a very good way of doing it. The problem with it at the moment is it's not very ubiquitous. So in some markets, for example, say Germany, I think is reasonably got good ubiquitous coverage. Then a developer or a company can go and get an answer about 90% of the transactions they're looking at, and that's useful. The problem is if you only get it for a quarter of the transactions you're looking at, it's because you've only got one operator providing that service in a market. It's not actually that convenient. It helps a bit, but it doesn't really move, it
So
doesn't
to
get you
be
over.
really effective, let's say to help a bank
Mm.
with fraud, it needs to have information from all the operators in that market, not just one.
Well, ideally, I think is the simple answer. But
But
I mean, if you turn the tables around, imagine you're a developer, and could you be bothered if this solution, which is relatively complex to implement and think through, takes is only going to solve a quarter of your problems? You'd think, well, okay, I might look at it, but I'd be much more certain to look at it if it solved 90% of my problems or 85%. And you see this in markets all over the world, in different places at different times. There's believe it or not, there's a thing called the network effect, and the kind of take up of services is directly related, or not even directly. The equation is a little bit more complicated, but when you start getting up to the kind of 70, 80%, 90% availability of services, you get much, much higher take up than you do if you're at 30 or 20%. And it's not linear, it's a non-linear equation. So the availability and the ease of doing it is tremendously important. But we focus there on the first area, which is fraud and identity, which is really the important area right now. There's a lot of time also spent talking about the other area, which I would call video broadly. I mean, it's not just video, but it's mainly about sort of bandwidth on demand, the sort of quality and slicing conversation. It's a different model because you can do that with just one operator. So I think operators are quite intrigued and like that idea, and also they can see how they can make sort of more direct money out of it because you can provide a slicing service, which they've invested a lot of money in their networks to build, in theory, off the back of these quality on demand applications. And indeed, there are good business models for it, but it's at a much earlier stage than there are really there's some great use cases for this which actually combine both, which is a lovely way of illustrating the potential for the technology. But the reality is the massive opportunity right now is in fraud and identity, and that's where telcos need to be racing. And I mean, I think I might have annoyed the GSMA by saying that they should offer a minimum, almost like a free charge on some of these services to start them out. Use a
yeah,
a freemium model with one of them, say mobile number verification or something like that, just to get people understanding that it's available, B, it works, and make it ubiquitous and easy and simple, because it's a completely new business for operators to be in at scale. I mean, many operators offer APIs for different things at the moment, but the whole point of things like Open Gateway is to try and make one thing available at scale. And if you go back to the big problem that operators have had, maybe the biggest problem in the last 10 years has been the way that hyperscalers have outcompeted operators. They've out-invested, they've out-innovated. And part of the reason for that is that they have global scale and they focus on doing a small number of things really, really well. And operators don't have that, individually don't have that global scale. Yet the products that they offer that do have that great success, calls and messages, absolutely have simplicity and global scale across the globe. So it's about replicating that success in this new area that's going to make it successful and make it grow faster and scale. Sorry,
So
Annie, I
let's
really
talk about
enthused at you there.
let's talk about the CPaaS market a bit.
Yes.
I mean, we tend to think, or I tend to think perhaps, about APIs in a way as though we're creating a simplified plug and play world. Um, but I know you have a more complex vision, which you've already sort of talked about, of how this market works. So could you can you describe the market as you see it and how CPaaS plays in this market? Are CPaaS providers and CPaaS, and by the way, communications platform as a service is what we're talking about, which is shameful how far we've got into this conversation without saying that. Sorry. So, how do they come into it? I mean, are we looking at CPaaS as a way as aggregating and scaling? I mean, is that their
Yes.
job?
And put simply, yes. Personally, I think about it slightly differently. I think of it as all as part of one thing, which is businesses want to engage more intelligently with their people, partners, processes, everything around them. That's what's going on. That's why all this stuff is happening. And the words that I put around this is the idea of intelligent engagement. Why intelligent? Because usually what's being involved in this process, and increasingly what's been involved in this progress, is greater intelligence about the interaction. So if you think about the API question, if you think about the kind of exchange of fraud identity information, I regard that as a form of specialized intelligence because it's in that moment it's telling me this is Annie that I'm talking to now, specialized intelligence, not telling me your credit record or your preferences or what you like to buy or what you do with your time. That it's not giving me any of that. It's giving me a very focused piece of specialized intelligence, which I think is valuable. The other thing, guess what? AI. Um, yeah, a big topic, but everybody everywhere is integrating artificial intelligence in one form or another into what they do. I mean, everybody on this call, every business is, they're all trying to bring it all together. And what we're seeing in the space which CPaaS and APIs and everything else exist in, intelligent engagement, is a drive to increase the amount of intelligence being applied to any given point in that process and the amount or the extent of the engagement. So the engagement can be something, so if you start at the very simplest version of this, you'd, in the UK, dentists and people, shops, anywhere you have an appointment, will use a simple mechanism, which is a CPaaS type product, where they'll send you a text message to remind you of your appointment. And by the way, just talk about CPaaS as a word for a minute. I always struggle with it, and this is what we talked about, Annie. When I first described what I was working on to my wife Kate, she said, "Well, it's a brilliant thing, but what a terrible word for it! What a terrible description!" And I think that's part of the problem in all of this stuff. Our language is so poor, which is why I like intelligent engagement because I can remember it apart from anything else. But it starts with this idea that you're trying to engage better with your customers. So if you think about that situation where he's sending an SMS to someone to say, "Hey, Andrew, have you remembered your dentist's appointment?" It's extremely useful. It's quite specific intelligence. It's a reminder. It's quite sort of basic at that level. It's just a reminder to go. It's tomorrow. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning. You must be there. Fantastic. By the way, there are penalty charges for missing or whatever. That's a pretty basic application. What that tends to evolve into in the worlds I look at is what called customer experience more broadly. And I mean, customer experience is another terribly overused word. I mean, I've heard it used for, well, centuries, but the point of where it's being used now is being used a lot in technologies, and they're tending to bring together things like unified communications as a service. Another terrible acronym. What does that mean? It means all sorts of different things. It means bringing together different forms of communication as a service. Oh God, it does my head in. What they're trying to do is engage intelligently with their customers. There's another piece of it which is called contact center as a service. So that's another, they call them AASs. They're bringing all the S's together, which is something I've heard people say to their amusement. That's where they're selling contact centers, which are an integrated package of all this stuff together. It's all the same stuff. It's all the ability to engage better with customers and add more intelligence to it. So you're starting to see, this greater integration of the capabilities, greater availability of stuff. We're starting to see this has been going on for years, but it's starting to become a more mature technology and more mature in the marketplaces. But AI intelligence is going deeper and deeper into this. So everyone in here has probably got a course transcription service, and if you don't, you probably should get one because they're dead useful. But what if your course transcription service was recorded in your company, and you were able to interrogate that information for insights broadly across all the salespeople you've got, all the customer care people, all the contact centers you've got? Wouldn't that be amazing? Because at the moment it just goes into vapor somewhere.
One of the things I detest actually is when my doctor's surgery or dentist or whoever contacts me as a reminder or whatever it is, and you can't reply.
Yeah.
So then you have to go and find the phone number or whatever it is and sit through 5 layers of IVR and, blah, 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 to find out actually they can't help you anyway with
Yeah.
whatever it is. But I mean, I really almost feel like one-way communication, like your appointments tomorrow, should be banned if it doesn't allow me to say, sorry, I just slipped and broke my ankle and I won't be able to make it or whatever.
I, I
I mean, to me, a lot of the stuff that CPAS does is like broadcast, not engagement.
That's true, and that's true if you like at the most
They're the most simple and where it began.
maybe the 20-year-old version of CPAS or the 15 year
I
old
still
version.
get that stuff all the time from
But that's
organizations
cool.
I
But
deal
that
with.
be, if you think about a dentist, my dentist down the road, he's not, he doesn't have an IT department. He works on his own and he's got a receptionist. You're talking about businesses that don't have a high degree necessarily at this point of technical sophistication. What will change, I mean, it will be how much more sophistication is available in that. And at the kind of high end of this, I mean, one of the things I've seen so we've got at the CPASA, we've got a case directory of over 100 cases now. So people using it, examples from people in the industry. And one example is, for example, the Dutch Grand Prix, I think in the year after COVID, was run completely as a digital only proposition using CPAS and that kind of technology. So ticketing, race information, which beer queue is the shortest, what's going on in this race right now. If you want to leave the car park, exit 3 is better. Using all of this stuff in an interactive and high and an intelligent way. So absolutely, that's where it's going, and that's where the value is. So and if you think about it so this comes back to the original principle about simplicity, about convenience, about making things easy. Because what we really want to do is make stuff better. That's what wins in this world. That's where you create more value. That's where all businesses today are trying to go towards. I'm thinking it's maybe like a model of something called intelligent operations, where we talked about earlier, being able to change things on a very fast basis and be able to give people better information all the time. And it's moving towards that now. Very few companies are at that point at the moment. Very, very few are
So
at that
would
level of
this be
sophistication.
why, if you don't have an IT department, but you want to excel with customer service, that maybe you would look to use a platform?
Yes, so if you think about the two technical solutions or the two extremes of technical solutions, buying a platform like you might do, say, for your email or whatever, is a much easier way in than getting an API. If you've already got a load of technical stuff, then you're probably seeking an API to plug it into what you've already got somewhere. So that's where the API world and the platforms world cross over. And you might even at some point choose to upgrade all your platforms to make it easier to bring in more connections, more interactivity, and so on. So the two things are related to each other. They're typically at a different stage of either a company's development or its own technical sophistication. But they're absolutely right, Annie. Why do you buy a platform? To make it easier.
Well, that'd be the plan, wouldn't it? So I'm just thinking that some of the best known platforms, and apologies in advance for any accidental omissions. I'm just thinking of Infobip or Intersect Sync.
Yeah.
etc. I'm wondering, Andrew, if you've got any views on how Aduna's arrival on the scene could play out, and perhaps also in case anybody's had a sleep for a few months, you might explain what Aduna is.
Well, I'll do my best. Aduna is a joint venture which kind of emerged from Ericsson and Vonage. It's separate from both, but it uses some of the IP and assets of both Ericsson and Vonage, which is a joint venture with a number of operators, and I
I
forget the
think
number,
we're up to 14, but
14.
the
Yeah.
last I paid close attention, yes.
Yes, I think it's 14. It was 12 just before Mobile
Mm.
Congress. I think there's been a couple of KDDI, I think have joined, and maybe one other operators who are collaborating in a joint venture on network APIs. So the idea is, I think that they want Aduna to be a point in the system which aggregates network APIs from these different operators, simplifies, let's call it, standardizes. I don't know if they're simplifying, I hope they are. Standardizes their network APIs so they're all providing the same ones, and at least they have the same terms. They won't have the same prices because you're not allowed to do that. That's anti-competitive, it's antitrust,
They can
etc.
read as a cartel, I guess.
That's right. The idea of it is that it produces a simpler interface for people to, developers in particular, to interface with. But not, I mean, when we talk about developers, who do we mean? There's a lot of, people like Twilio and Cinch and Infobip are all connected, will all partner with Aduna where they need to. But Aduna's not the only network aggregator. There are other people who aggregate stuff. Not all of it is Kamara. There's a lot of, it's a highly fragmented world at the moment. And it's quite complex to defragment it because things have evolved and people are used to using the APIs they've got, for example, in certain different parts of the world. And moving to Kamara is a complexity for them. It's not making it easier. So, there's quite a lot of bridges that need to be covered or crossed before everybody's doing the same thing, which is what we really need to make it really ubiquitous and valuable.
So
And so
one of
you do know what your other question was, what about it? It's in its early stages of formation, I think. And my colleague Rob, I know, has been talking to them a lot at CPASA, and great, they've joined CPASA, which is fantastic. So it's
all
great to
right.
have that kind of collaboration on board. Um, and we have a number of the operators as part of our ecosystem as well. Because the point is, we deal with the demand end of the ecosystem. We're dealing with enterprises and people trying to work out how you package this stuff up and how you make it go faster, because that's what they all want. Aduna, I think, as an organization, is relatively young. I mean, well, like a lot of people in this space. So it's going through formation, is my impression of it. I haven't dealt directly with them recently, so I couldn't say more than that, but I've obviously read the press releases. What was your
Well,
question? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, really, I sort of interpret it as, all those companies you've just mentioned, from Twilio to Infobip, etc. In a way, you could say that they ate the telcos' lunch. The telcos didn't do enough to come together like they did, so that, for example, you can make a phone call anywhere in the world. They didn't come together. So that's how that first generation of, if you like, of platforms came together, because the telcos, if you wanted to deal with all the telcos, it was too difficult. So that's how the platforms came to be. And I'm sort of seeing Aduna as the telcos themselves wanting to run that facility, and to have, not to have to involve other platforms, but to do it themselves, really.
Yeah, I understand why you see it like that. I don't think that, first of all, this concept of other people eating telco's lunch. If
I'm
lunch
quoting from somebody there, but I'm not allowed to reveal my source. But yes.
if if lunch was available, then it was available to everyone to eat. The reason telcos didn't do it is because they failed to collaborate at
Yeah,
scale,
exactly.
and they
Exactly.
failed to innovate individually sufficiently quickly and well, or most of them. So they have to learn from that lesson. You know, that you have to collaborate or innovate at enormous velocity individually with an investment level that they rarely can match. So, you know, the eat your lunch sort of thing is like, it's like you've stolen my sandwiches in the playground. I think it's a little bit kind
This
of,
market by rights should have belonged to me, is
there's a
kind
degree
of
of
the thinking.
entitlement to it.
If only I'd have got my act together. Andrew, we're nearly out of time, but we do have a question from the audience, and I think it's really important to answer it.
Please do.
And could you spell CPASA out, because so that people can find it? And also, please, could you explain how it's different from camera or
I'll
Camara,
do
however
it.
you want
I'll
to
do
pronounce it?
Okay, so CPASA is spelled CPAASAA.
So
So that
it's the communications platform as a service, something
acceleration
application.
alliance.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, it's right. Okay.
Think que pasa, as in what's going on. It's not spelled with a Q. It's not spelled like
I
que
was going to
pasa.
say, let's not confuse people further. Anyway, how's it different from camera or Camara,
So
whatever?
Kamara. Okay, now it might be stretching the bounds of my technical knowledge here. Uh, Kamara, as I understand it, is unifying or setting the standards for interfaces between telcos and network APIs. So it's the technical bit, the systematic bit of going from one place to the other, from developer through to operator through to developer. That's what Kamara is doing. So it's standardizing those bits because it is a software developer related organization, a software related organization. CPASA is an alliance of people in that marketplace to try and do business better fundamentally. So they're different. So Kamara is a technical standards body making network APIs work faster. CPASA is a business body helping people connect with each other, understand how we get things done quicker and faster, and raising boats together, raising the tide to raise the boats together. Different
So,
goals,
so
different types, different goals.
in an ideal world, Camara would Camara's work would be consumed by members of CPASA.
Yes, it would, and others.
Oh, yes, I didn't mean that
Yeah,
exclusively, but
yeah.
Andrew, thank you very much for your insights into this
So
quite complicated and, as you said, somewhat fragmented world.
it
Um,
is.
Interesting and not much spoken about, which to me seems kind of weird because it's fundamental to the success of APIs. Anyway,
It's
uh,
one of the things, and it's made itself too complicated, and I think that's part of what we've got
I
to
think
fix.
that is part of the problem, definitely. Thank you for your time and your help. I look forward to seeing you, I hope, at one of our future events. And in the
Thank you.
meantime, we're going to move on to our final panel for today.